Today on Leaf by Leaf, 10 books for grazing. Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. It's been a while since I've done a good list video, so I was trying to think of something interesting. And it occurred to me the other night that I always leave a handful of books around for grazing. What I mean by that is just dipping into them here and there on a whim, instead of setting myself the task of actually reading them and finishing the book itself. Many of them aren't novels or anything that takes the form of a book that's made to be read from start to finish with an eye to staying close to the story. These are 10 books that I find myself constantly grazing on when the mood strikes. First, the essays of Michel de Montaigne. I cannot describe the feeling I get when I read Montaigne. I mean, here's a guy who had the luxury of essentially locking himself away in a turret within a French chateau, not worrying about bills and any of these types of things, but just immersing himself in the Latin and Greek literature that he loved so much, and then basically establishing the form of the essay that's roughly still in use today, though it's a lot more rigorous and structured now, and there's a tight thesis. His, of course, the original French essay meant just trying things out. Like, you know what, I've got an idea on prognostication, or the act of foretelling events. And, you know, his mind is full of all the great writers, Cicero, Homer, Virgil, Catullus, you name it. And so he's just going and picking through this great literature within a contextual framework, and then just sort of pinning it out, you know, writing as he's thinking through it. So it's really a joy to read, and there's so much wisdom in here, and so much great literature up to his time. And the essays are generally short enough to where you can graze on one single essay at a time. I keep this particular volume, this is the M.A. Screech translation. I prefer the Donald Frame version. My Everyman hardcover is Donald Frame, but I like to keep a paperback for especially my grazing books. So they can get banged up, and I don't cringe, and I have no problem if they get coffee stains on them or whatever. But I keep this one by my bed. Shakespeare Sonnets. This is a new Pelican. No, this is the new Penguin edition. My Pelican edition of the Sonnets is strangely missing from my library, and I have I have 4 different complete Shakespeares in hardcover, but to just dip into the sonnets, you know, it's kind of unwieldy with the hardcover, but these are perfect. I mean, they're sonnets, you know, they're short. The Shakespearean sonnet, we're talking 14 lines. And I mean, yeah, it starts out with a lot of arguments in favor of having a child and all this, which you know, socially can be out of date depending on your views. But the language and the way in which he says things, one of my favorites, just from the second sonnet. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Beautiful. I mean, instead of just saying when you're 40 years old, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's fields, you can almost see the frown lines across the forehead there. And then how about that phrase, a tattered weed of small worth held? I've circled that because I've used that for a short story that I've been marketing around. Just a total rip-off of the title. I mean, what writer hasn't ripped off a Shakespeare title or a Shakespeare phrase at this point? I mean, I can't recommend these enough. And those are just the first couple. Then you get into the Dark Lady poems and all this. I really wish I could find that Pelican. That's like the 4th book I've noticed is missing. The other one is, I just recently read Linda Bostrom Knausgaard's The Helios Disaster. And the ending really reminded me of Kate Chopin's The Awakening, and I can't find my copy anywhere. The only thing I can think is that I think it was a Barnes & Noble edition paperback, and I never cared for the way those looked. They just looked so ratty. I don't know. And I think I may have given it over to a secondhand bookstore. But anyway, I'm renting. This is a new edition. I get to start marking it up. Smells good. I like to smell my books, okay? But yeah, Shakespeare sonnets. I always try to keep a book of short stories going that I dip into. Actually, right now, I'm actually reading through Juan Rulfo's The Plain in Flames. This is on the heels of reading Pedro Páramo, which, oh man, what a book. I've got a video out here of it. But I've also recently discovered, because of reading some of the articles and essays of Roberto Bolaño, he talked about this book that I didn't know about, The Book of Fantasy, edited by Borges, Silvina Ocampo, and Adolfo Bioy Casares, and then with an introduction by Ursula K. Le Guin. Fantasy is more, this is more like literary. So if you just look through the names here, you're going to see John Aubrey, J.G. Ballard, Max Beerbohm, Ambrose Bierce, Adolfo Bioy Casares, Borges is in here, Ray Bradbury, G.K. Chesterton, John Cocteau, Julio Cortázar, Silvino Ocampo, Edgar Allan Poe, Tolstoy's in here, Voltaire, Oscar Wilde, and they're all generally pretty short. And really, the Max Beerbohm, Enoch Soames, it is an amazing work in and of itself. And I have Zalika Dobson, but I didn't have a copy of Enoch Soames, but I'd been hearing a lot about it, so now that's in here too. But I mean, here's the deal. This is a collection of short stories that were selected by Ocampo, Borges, and Casares, so I had to get my hands on it. I think I paid like $38 for this pretty decent edition. But just to dip into some more fantastic literature, this is a good one for grazing short stories. I live in North Carolina, and I love these field guides by Stan Tikala. He is a great naturalist and photographer. I don't have the wildflowers one yet, but these are the trees and the birds. And especially living out here in the woods, as I do now, I sometimes just take these. I mean, I'll graze these just, sitting in the house, but they're also great for taking out in the woods or sitting in the front yard or the backyard, and using them to not only identify the birds and the trees that I see around here, but just to absorb this language of nature. I remember reading in one of Philip Roth's books, maybe one of his earlier fictions, or maybe middle Roth, I don't remember, but there was a character that said something about how they wanted to make sure their children wouldn't just say, "Oh, there's a dog," but the child would learn to say, "Oh, that's a German Shepherd." Be able to actually know the names and classifications that have been given, and I think that's really important. And this allows me not only to just do something I enjoy, which birding is something I enjoy. I keep my binoculars right here because I've got bird feeders just out here, but it's also fun to use these books to that process of identifying things, and I can't say enough about these because they've got them for like the trees. You start with identifying either the bark or the leaf, of course, and the way that they've organized it is really good. And then they've color tabbed the birds one by the prominent color of the bird. There's also an accompanying CD that this one came with. You can start to learn the songs and sounds of each bird too. Poems. I think I've talked about my Oxford Book of English Verse. The only thing with that is it doesn't have any annotations whatsoever. And I like Harold Bloom. I love his commentary, and he's at his strongest when he's talking about poetry. So this Best Poems of the English Language from Chaucer through Robert Frost, with his commentary, I have discovered so many great poems by reading through this and dipping into it. I also just really like the layout. I like the font they used. I like the margins, the kerning. Ironically, Bloom never had a lot of nice things to say about Thomas Stearns Eliot, as he would always make a point of calling him. But one of the poems that he chose, La figlia che piange, which is the dying daughter, is one of my favorite poems in here. Stand on the highest pavement of the stair, lean on a garden urn, weave the sunlight in your hair. Clasp your flowers to you with a pained surprise. Fling them to the ground and turn with a fugitive resentment in your eyes. But weave the sunlight in your hair. That's not all of it, but it's just a beautiful poem. So yeah, I dip into this for poetry. Then there's the Oxford Book of Aphorisms. If you've been watching some of my other aphoristic or aphorism videos, I just recently did a book giveaway of Oscar Wilde's epigrams. But here is a fine collection chosen by John Gross, and it is kind of like Wilde's epigrams. It's categorized into nature, religion, mankind, life, desires and longings, so on and so on. But as you go through it, you can see that he has really done a good job at combing through so many great writers' works to get these. Samuel Butler, Nietzsche, Andre Gide, Thoreau, Gertrude Stein, Goethe, Chekhov, Aurelius, G.K. Chesterton, Montaigne, Cervantes, Epictetus, Anatole France, Aristotle, Dr. Johnson, F.H. Bradley, Dickens, La Rochefoucauld, Balzac, Carlyle, La Bruyere, Hawthorne, you get the idea. But really you can just pick one. Here's one at random. Many would be cowards if they had courage enough. That's Thomas Fuller. I also like to graze on books about books. The Book About Books, which was formerly called The Anatomy of Bibliomania by Holbrook Jackson. This is a great compendium of brief little sections on the Book About Books. So in part 3, called The Pleasure of Books, we get little essays like Of Reading for Its Own Sake and Pleasure, a Condition Both Profitable and Honest. Treasuries of Happiness Never Exhausted. So it's got this really sort of flowery, whimsical, more Victorian type feel to it. But it is exhaustive, wall to wall, very well read. As a reader, I love to read books about the reading life, about other books. As a book reviewer, I love to always be reading books that have reviews in them. So, you know, like Maureen Corrigan or Michael Dirda, Jonathan Yardley, Stephen Moore, of course. Even the 1,000 books to read before you die. Each of those little entries for those books, even if I've already read them, I like to see what other people have to say about them and how they choose to word their sentences. And plus, like this one, anything that's packed with references and allusions to other literature across the gamut of published work is a huge plus. So it's not always the book about books, but some book about books. And for the final 3, these are big bulky hardcovers. I have a video dedicated to this one in particular. This is the Oxford American Writers Thesaurus. I'm going to tell you, these 3, it's a dictionary of modern English usage. This is the updated version of Fowler's. It's updated for the 21st century by Jeremy Butterfield. He does an excellent job of retaining Fowler's voice, but also updating it. And then I've got the American Heritage Dictionary. This is the 5th edition. I just bought these updated editions within the last year of a Thesaurus dictionary and then the Dictionary of Modern English Usage. I won't say too much about the Thesaurus, only that there are tons of writers who contributed to making this a great reference. It's not only a great reference for the writer, but also just for someone who appreciates language and wants to expand their vocabulary and learn fun facts about language. The American Heritage Dictionary is my favorite dictionary. This one, they've really done a good job. The production quality is superb, and you'll see in the margins, they really selected good visuals So if it's a certain type of animal, for instance, that isn't very common, they'll include a picture of it. The same with plants. But then it also has all these little call-outs by contributing writers. It's really hard to communicate to non-dictionary readers the appeal of dictionary reading. But for anyone sensitive to language and curious about etymologies and things like that, really you'll find yourself just opening it at random. Also, in case you haven't noticed on my channel, I'm horrible at pronunciations. For whatever reason, I tend to pronounce things just on first glance totally differently than most people, and it gets me into trouble a lot. So again, a dictionary does a great job of giving me that, the IPA for how to pronounce it. Fowler's Dictionary of Modern English Usage. So what is this? It's a usage dictionary. So it's set up just like a dictionary, but when you go to the word in question, it just gives you lots of rich information about proper usage of that word. And it also gives you points about the difference between different types of English, Australian, Canadian, British, and American. It tells you when something should or should not be written with a hyphen. It tells you when something is, it even has phrases in here like, "there you are" is one of the entries. And it says, "This colloquial expression of regret, reluctant acceptance, resignation, etc., always preceded by but," meaning, "but there you are," has been in common use since the mid-19th century, and its currency remains unquestioned. Examples: "It's a pity we have to shoot so many of them, but there you are." And that's from L.P. Hartley in 1953. So again, all three of these include lots of great quotes. Again, I'll refer you to my video on the writer's Thesaurus because I picked out what I feel are really great quotes there. But this one, where it retains Fowler's original language, which is most of it, the way it's written is often very cheeky or somewhat overwrought for a dictionary. I guess what I'm saying is Fowler has a great style that makes reading what they have to say very amusing. For example, here's coruscating. Coruscating is one of those glitteringly impressive words on which certain magpie writers, especially journalists, light in order to embellish their prose, often with scant regard for its meaning. How great is that? Who cares what the word even means or its actual usage? I sometimes read this just for the cheekiness. So that's it. Those are 10 books that I use for grazing. Let me hear about some of the books that you like to use for grazing and dipping into.